Hello, everyone, and welcome into tonight's episode of Connor in Coverage. My name is Connor Riley. As you probably noted on Twitter a few minutes ago, Alabama's made a defensive coordinator hire. That'll be the first news and note of our show here tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about Todd Monken, obviously interviewed for two different jobs last week at the NFL level, latest on him. Just a little bit on Stetson Bennett, Senior Bowl fallout. There were some interesting comments that were made this week about him, to say the least there. And then we'll take your comments and questions here. We can touch a little bit on signing day wrap-up, as that was this past Wednesday. I think the biggest news of the day, Deuce Robinson ultimately does not end up signing. He is expected to take this out, see where his baseball potentials take him. I know he really wants to focus on that, see how highly he can get drafted. Most see him as a fringe top 200 prospect. I think if he were to get up into that top, 60, 70, 90 range, first three rounds of the draft, maybe then he more seriously considers playing pro baseball. But he made it very clear this week he wants to pursue college football, and Georgia is very much still going to continue to be an attractive option for him there. But with that further ado, let's get into our main topic here of the night on Connor in Coverage. Alabama has made their defensive coordinator hire. They are set to hire Kevin Steele. ESPN's Chris Lowe is the first to report this news. Steele is obviously a veteran of the SEC. He has twice before worked on Alabama's coaching staff under Nick Saban, was his first defensive coordinator in 2007, also served on that staff in 2008, along with on 2013 and 2014 coaching there, player system personnel in 13, inside linebackers coach in 14, and now back as the defensive coordinator once again. Most notably, he is known for being the defensive coordinator at Auburn for 5 seasons under Gus Malzahn, but he's also had defensive coordinator experience at places like LSU and Clemson there as well, was very briefly the interim defensive coordinator, or the interim head coach rather, at Tennessee before they had hired Josh Heupel and after they had fired Jeremy Pruitt. But as it pertains to Georgia, I think the biggest news here is, if you're a Bulldogs fan, is that it is not Glenn Schumann. And it did not sound like he ever really gained a whole lot of traction there for that job, was never publicly mentioned much. And I tend to believe that is because he probably made it pretty clear to Saban early on. Again, this is no inside reporting on this, that he was not interested in leaving Georgia. At this point is, I believe, a lateral move. And that's not to say that Alabama has fallen down to Georgia's level. On the contrary, I believe Georgia is now up to where Alabama is, and that is contending for a national championship every year. The Bulldogs have won the last 2. And Schumann's coaching on that side of the ball has been a big reason why. You think back in 2021, the best players on that defense were Nakobe Dean, Quay Walker, and Channing Tindall. They made everything go from that inside linebacker position and played a really key part in that second game, Georgia having the success that it had against Bryce Young in the national championship game. I thought it was because the inside linebackers played a lot better and were a lot more aggressive in getting after Bryce Young in that game. They have to replace all 3 of those guys. Nakobe Dean was the Butkus Award winner. Quay Walker was a first-round pick, and in steps Shema Munden and Jamon Dumas-Johnson, and both had exceptional seasons for Georgia this year. I think both are going to be worth monitoring to be All-American type candidates entering next season. Not to mention you have guys like Xavier Sori, who I think a lot of people are going to be interested in seeing how he develops this offseason. Jalen Walker is a guy they are trying to play at inside linebacker, but because of different circumstances at the outside linebacker position, has shown that he has to have the ability to play out there, and he's played it quite well. And it speaks to, I think, the recruiting and development acumen that a guy like Schumann has, to where he's able to identify a guy like Walker, beat out Clemson for him out of the Salisbury, North Carolina area, and bring him into this program and immediately turn him into a guy that can contribute for this team in a variety of different roles. It speaks to the strength of Schumann's inside linebacker room, which he has coached since 2016 here at Georgia, that Tresman Marshall was a guy who left this program this offseason and went to Alabama to find more playing time. It speaks to where Schumann has elevated this room to, and he's only going to continue to do that, because you look at what Georgia's bringing in at the inside linebacker position in the recruiting class. I don't know if there's a better positional haul out there in this cycle. Maybe Ohio State's wide receiver haul when they bring in Brandon Inniss, Noah Rogers, and Carnell Tate. But with what Georgia landed in Raylan Wilson, CJ Allen, and Troy Bowles, different reasons to be excited about all of them, which we'll get into here in a second. But number 3, 6, and 7 overall player per the On3 consensus at that inside linebacker position. And those guys don't have immediate roles to fill. Munden and Dumas-Johnson are coming back next season. Sori and Ryan Davis are coming back next season. Jalen Walker is coming back next season. E.J. Licey is expected to take on a bigger role for Georgia next year. So they're not able to come in here and necessarily get early playing time like you so often see for top ranked recruits. For example, Damon Wilson, the expectation is for him to come and play early because that is the current state of Georgia's outside linebacker room. But those guys all see what Schumann has done in terms of turning his players into NFL level linebackers. I believe Roquan Smith was either the first or second best linebacker in the NFL this year, him and Fred Warner, in my opinion. And Schumann earns a lot of praise for what he did with Roquan Smith for the 2 seasons that he got to work with them. Nakobe Dean, Quay Walker, I thought had a really strong rookie season for the Green Bay Packers when he wasn't getting ejected from games. So you love what you've seen from Schumann and Georgia's ability to develop there at that inside linebacker position, and you're bringing in 3 more studs, and you already have DeMarcus Riddick, who's a top 50 overall player committed in the 2024 class. Georgia's right in the thick of it for Sammy Brown, a 5-star linebacker out of Jefferson, Georgia there as well. This guy recruits really well. He has been on the staff since Kirby first got here. He is one of 2 original Kirby assistant coach hires still on the staff here at Georgia. Del McGee is the other one. He has worked his way up to being the defensive coordinator at Georgia. And I would note he was the play caller for Georgia this past season in terms of signaling plays to the defense out there on the field. And he is a guy who, with what we have seen from his development, I have no doubt in my mind that he's one day going to be a head coach and probably an SEC head coach at that. And I think, like you've seen with some of the other assistants on Georgia staff that have gotten hired elsewhere, they can afford to be picky with the kind of jobs they take and go after leaving here. You see Sam Pittman go from the offensive line coach at Georgia to a head coach at Arkansas. You see Dan Lanning go from the defensive coordinator at Georgia to the head coach at Oregon, one of the better programs in the Pac-12 at this point in time. There's going to come a day where Glenn Schumann is ultimately hired away from Georgia. It didn't happen this time with the Alabama defensive coordinator gig, and I think that speaks to, most importantly from a Georgia perspective, where this program is, that now the move from being Georgia's co-defensive coordinator and defensive play caller is worth pointing that out there as well, to going to Alabama is seen as a lateral move there. And that's ultimately, I think, a big reason why Schumann is going to end up staying at Georgia, because I don't necessarily believe that a season or 2 at Alabama helps him accomplish the goals that he wants to accomplish at Georgia and ultimately becoming a college head coach, which I tend to believe that is what Schumann wants to be. He is still just 32 years old, turns 33 next month, and he's already accomplished a great deal of things at the University of Georgia. And so because of that, I think Georgia is well positioned going forward. Look, any staff that has Glenn Schumann on it is going to benefit from it. He is an incredibly sharp head coach. Monty Rice, I very vividly remember telling us that he believes Schumann is the smartest coach on Georgia's staff. He is a great game planner, great game designer. Clearly relates very well to his players, given how well he has recruited cycle after cycle now, and has shown that he is not just one of the better positional coaches in the country, but a clear up-and-comer and someone that is one day going to be a head coach. And the fact that at Georgia, you're able to keep a guy with clear head coaching potential on your team going forward, I think that's a big win. As for Alabama, there are some Alabama fans who are out there who are probably scratching their head. I think Kevin Steele is a very good defensive coordinator. I think he's probably an upgrade over Pete Golding, quite frankly. And so they'll be fine there. He's got a ton of talent to work with, had a lot of success at Auburn. I think you're going to see that Alabama defense probably get back closer to where it was, say, under the Kirby Smart, Jeremy Pruitt era than where it was necessarily under Tosh Lapoy and Pete Golding in recent years there. He's the second coordinator hire that Alabama has made. They hired Tommy Rees, the Notre Dame offensive coordinator. That's a little bit more to the general public, a little bit more head scratching. His offenses were good, not necessarily great at Notre Dame. But one thing I'd point out, look, Nick Saban's made a lot of really good offensive coordinator hires in a row. Say what you want about Bill O'Brien. Okay, well, he's now the offensive coordinator for the New England Patriots. And I, as a Patriots fan, feel very comfortable about what Bill O'Brien's going to be able to do there. Before that, hire Steve Sarkisian when not a lot of people would have necessarily hired him, especially given how things went with him at the Atlanta Falcons, and that worked out wonderfully. Hired Lane Kiffin way back in 2014. That worked out really well there. Mike Locksley was there for 1 year, and ultimately he gets to go on and become the Maryland head coach after 1 season there. Brian Daboll, one of the better NFL coaches in the country, or not in the country, one of the better NFL coaches right now out there. Nick Saban went in and plucked him from relative obscurity and named him the offensive coordinator prior to the 2017 season. I know Reese isn't the biggest name. He's not, what necessarily every Alabama fan expected. There's not a lot of flash and sizzle there, but I trust that Nick Saban knows what he's doing, and there's something clear that both he and Brian Kelly, who tried to hire him to join him at LSU last year, see in Tommy Rees. And so I expect, again, I'm not saying he's an upgrade over Bill O'Brien because I just fundamentally don't believe that. but I do think that he is probably a better coordinator than some are giving him credit for at this point in time. And so, touching a little bit there, obviously Alabama news ties into it, but I spent bulk of the time there talking about Glenn Schumann, what his hire means to, or what his role at Georgia is, what he means to this program, why it is a win to have him around for what will be another season. And I imagine he's going to get a nice pay raise after what he did with this defense this season, given, yes, there was some fall off in the second half of the season, but I thought with the play you saw from the front seven, from the linebackers this season, you couldn't be impressed. You could not be impressed with what Glenn Schumann was able to do for Georgia this season. And I think you see why he is so highly valued by this Georgia coaching staff, by Kirby Smart, and why he's going to continue to be a prominent player for Georgia on their coaching staff for years to come there. Touching a little bit more on Georgia coaching news here, Todd Monken NFL Watch is a sort of next topic here we're going to touch on tonight. He had interviewed for the Baltimore Ravens offensive coordinator job for a second time last week. He interviewed for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive coordinator job. There are still quite a few NFL offensive coordinator and 2 head coach openings open. I know he's not necessarily been mentioned as a head coaching candidate for either the Cardinals or Colts, who are still looking, but it does bear repeating. Let's say Dan Quinn gets hired to be the Cardinals coach. I know he is interviewed there. Why wouldn't Dan Quinn go out and try and bring in a guy like Todd Monken, coached against him in the NFC South when Quinn was the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons? And so I think there's going to be jobs and opportunities that continue to be worth monitoring. I don't think he's going to be the Bucs offensive coordinator. I think, there's been enough writing on the walls there that they feel pretty good about Georgia bringing Monken back from that job. But let's say that Ravens offer Todd Monken that job and he ends up taking it. I could certainly see that. I know there's a lot of smoke and questions about what's next for Lamar Jackson. I think, look, there are 2 routes you go there. Either you sign Lamar to a long-term deal and you have him as your quarterback, and he's one of the, when healthy, the 5 or 6 best quarterbacks in the NFL, or you're able to trade him, get a bushel of picks, and sort of use that to develop your next quarterback, because there are going to be a lot of quarterback-hungry teams out there. The Colts, who pick at 4, the Houston Texans, who are picking at 2. I think there are a lot of teams out there that would love to have Lamar Jackson on their team and have the draft capital at the top of the NFL draft to be able to go up and select one of these young, promising quarterbacks, whether it be Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Will Levis, Anthony Richardson there. There's a lot to like. We've touched on this before. It seems like the NFL people seem to think Todd Monken is going to be an NFL offensive coordinator next year. Where at, we don't know yet. I feel pretty comfortable ruling out Tampa at this point. Because if he were that interested in the Bucs job, I think he'd maybe already have it. And the fact that we're now entering, I think, week 3 of Monken Bucs watch probably indicates where things are with that job. The Ravens job, again, they're doing the due diligence, interviewing multiple guys for a second time. I believe they're still waiting on Eric Bieniemy to interview for that job, the Kansas City Chiefs offensive coordinator. So this process is going to play out a little bit longer, but I think by now most Georgia fans are accustomed to, hey, if Monken leaves, he goes, and we'll figure it out from there. At this point, I'm sure there's maybe even some that want to have the Band-Aid ripped off. But look, Georgia's going to have attractive offensive coordinator openings and options and possibilities in the event Monken does go. I know everyone has an opinion on Mike Bobo. We'll touch on that if and when it comes time to. Buster Faulkner is a name to know. Brian McClendon on staff has past offensive coordinator experience. And again, I think Kirby would be wise to look at the NFL level, given the success we saw Todd Monken have coming from the NFL, bringing his schemes and concepts in, and how that helped elevate this Georgia program. Why not go and try and do that again and rediscover the same sort of thing? Maybe not necessarily hire a Monken disciple, but hire someone who has a scheme that works and you think can, with the talent advantage that Georgia has, use that to your advantage there. So Monken, we're heading into essentially week 3 now of, will he take an offensive coordinator job at the NFL level? If I had to guess at this point, all the college people seem to think that he is coming back, and I'd probably lean that he comes back at this point, but I think that might just be because I don't believe that the Ravens are ultimately going to offer him the offensive coordinator job. And if they do offer him, you wonder guys that might ultimately take that job. One name, an NFL name that I'd be interested in and seeing what he wants to do. Brian Johnson is the quarterback's coach for the Philadelphia Eagles. He's coaching the Super Bowl next week. Worked really, I think, wonders with Jalen Hurts, has college experience, was Dan Mullen's offensive coordinator there at Florida. And I will just say this. I know, the Mullen staff didn't necessarily want to go out and recruit. Todd Monken is not some dynamite recruiter who's out there grinding on the trail, like, say, Schumann, Chidera Uzo-Deribe, Todd Hartley. He is not of that ilk. But we just saw Monken. Monken was not a grade A recruiter, a guy that was out there all the time, sort of, going in and running his things. And so this idea that whoever replaces Monken needs to be a super duper recruiter or something like that, I actually disagree. I think as long as they are a very solid and comfortable and confident play caller, I think that's the most important thing there. Now, Johnson has never called plays. Dan Mullen held those responsibilities when they were at Florida together. But given Johnson works with the quarterbacks as well as he has, given that Monken is also Georgia's quarterbacks coach there as well, you would tend to probably think that maybe they'd want someone more quarterback focused that can fill both of those roles. Or what they could potentially do, and they'd have to shuffle some things around in the staff. Maybe you have Mike Bobo coach quarterbacks, and then Brian McClendon is your offensive coordinator as the play caller there. Or maybe you want to promote a Todd Hartley, a Del McGee, whoever that ultimately might be. I think maybe that's the path to go forward there as well with that offensive coordinator job and opening. So a little bit on Todd Monken there. Touched on Glenn Schumann. If you have comments or questions, go ahead and ask them now. Get them in. I'll pull them up on the chat here and sort of see where things are going. Alan Verbanich, Kevin Steele is the new defensive coordinator at Alabama. I touched on that at the top of the show if you're just joining us now. A little bit on Glenn Schumann and what that means, both for Georgia and I think for Alabama as well. Touched on that. Any other comments or questions here before I go into this next sort of segment there in terms of where things are going? And Steve Rogers brings this up. If Monken wanted to stay, why wouldn't he go ahead and announce it? That's just not Todd Monken's style. That's not who he is. And I'd point out, Todd Monken has never been someone to stay at one place for a long time. Only once in his coaching career, rather, has he been at a spot for more than 3 seasons. And that was when he was the Jacksonville Jaguars wide receivers coach from 2007 to 2010. And he was there for 4 seasons. So he's always sort of been a guy who bounces from job to job there. And so that is just not who he is. Mike Tampa Dog, yeah, it's killing me as well. I kind of just wish this would be over and we could move on to the next thing and maybe eventually get to a little bit of rest in the offseason here. But it always sort of seems to keep going, and that's how it is at a place like Georgia. And if that's the price of covering back-to-back national championships, then I will so gladly pay that. So one last thing here before we go full into questions. Stetson Bennett and Senior Bowl takeaway. Stetson Bennett did not go down there to Mobile last week, drew some criticism there. There were some national media people saying, does Stetson Bennett want to have an NFL career? Does he want to continue playing football? Yes. Yeah, he does. He's made it very clear multiple times. He wants to keep playing football and play football as long as he can. And that next stop is doing so in the NFL. I saw some quotes from Jim Nagy saying, when Stetson goes to the next level, he's going to have to learn how to be a backup. Well, a lot of these guys, especially that were participating at the Senior Bowl, are going to go be backups at the next level. But also, Stetson already has experience with that. He was the backup to Jake Fromm of all of 2019. He was the backup to JT Daniels at the start of the 2021 season. JT gets hurt. Stetson goes in, performs well at practice this week. Goes in, throws 5 touchdowns against UAB, and then when JT comes back, goes back to being the backup quarterback until JT Daniels gets hurt once again. And then from there leads Georgia to a Super Bowl. He's sort of the ultimate backup quarterback story. A lot of these guys that go on to the next, Brock Purdy, no one was saying about him, he had to learn how to be a backup. That just sort of speaks to, I think, the conversation that always seems to exist around Stetson Bennett. And again, his arrest last week, incredibly ill-timed, incredibly stupid. It was a public intoxication. There are much worse arrests that you could have. It's ultimately, I'm not going to believe, impact his NFL coaching or his NFL playing career. And it's just, again, for whatever reason, Stetson Bennett has sort of turned into this lightning rod of, some people love to criticize him for whatever reason that might be, maybe their own insecurities, maybe in the case of the Senior Bowl, maybe they were upset that he didn't want to come down there and play, even though they were waiting on Will Levis to accept an offer. He did not. And then when ultimately they pivoted to Bennett and thought he would just jump at the chance, and he said, no, I'm not your 6th or 7th pick. He is not a consolation prize. He should not be a consolation prize, in my opinion. And I think some of the coverage that you've seen about him this week has stemmed from the Senior Bowl not being thrilled that he said no to them. And again, there are risks in playing that. Just ask Malik Herring. Malik Herring went to the Senior Bowl 2 seasons ago after the 2020 season, and he tore his ACL going down there, practicing, competing, showing off for NFL teams. And he very fortunately is on an NFL roster now with the Kansas City Chiefs. But, if he doesn't tear his ACL because he felt the need to go down there and compete at the Senior Bowl, maybe he's drafted much higher and has had a much better NFL career to this point than spending the first year of his NFL career rehabbing and then the second year just trying to make an NFL roster. So there are risks involved with going down and playing the Senior Bowl, especially because it sounds like most of the quarterbacks down there this week didn't necessarily help themselves. I know Jake Haener won the MVP, and going into the week, I had always sort of thought Haener was the best of the bunch, but it doesn't sound like, Max Duggan, who went down there, had a great week. Malik Cunningham, who was the final invitee down there, didn't necessarily have a great week. The guy that a lot of people are trying to talk up and pump up is Hendon Hooker, who, mind you, is the exact same age as Stetson Bennett is right now, and also has a torn ACL at this point in time. So the quarterback crop was not necessarily strong. And look, Stetson Bennett wasn't going to turn himself into a first-round quarterback with a strong week down there in Mobile. There are always people that are going to ding him because of his size, and there are going to be people that don't love him because of the way he carries himself. But the way he carries himself is what has gotten him to the NFL. If he acted like someone else or someone lesser, he's not being invited to the NFL Combine and doing those sorts of things. So, look, people want to criticize Stetson. That's their right. They have the ability to do so. I just think some of this is misplaced and stems from personal vendettas that they might have against Stetson. And ultimately going forward, look, Stetson, obviously you can't be arrested for public intoxication. He knows that. He'll be the first to admit to that. But this idea that he can't be a backup when he's proven he can already do that and do the things that you want him to do and compete, learn the playbook, continue to do that, I think he's going to be just fine when it comes to the time of being an NFL backup. Because, a lot of people for a long time said that he wouldn't have this, but I'm telling you right now, and look, you can either be in denial about it or accept it as truth. Like, Stetson Bennett's going to be in an NFL training camp in August. And I don't think a lot of people thought that was ever going to be the case. And I think there's a very good chance. And if I had to bet today, he probably does end up getting drafted. So that's enough Stetson Bennett for right now. No need to get more worked up about it. We'll have more stuff on him, especially in the lead up to the Combine, where I'm sure once again he will be a popular candidate here. Yeah, G Bama boy. I think this is a good point. He's not trying to get a raise. Money is not of consequence right now to Todd Monken. I think him looking to the NFL level is, maybe he wants that challenge. He did not end his last tenure in the NFL on the best of notes. Got fired after 1 year in Cleveland. 3 seasons as the offensive coordinator. Only one of those as a play caller in Tampa. His last year in Tampa, I think the reason that Monken might want to go there, and again, we don't know any of this because Monken does not often talk to the media, but the reason he might be is to go out there and right some of the past wrongs from his time in the NFL. What round do I see Stetson getting drafted? Probably the 5th or the 6th round. Jake Fromm was a 5th round pick there. I think, look, some teams are going to see Stetson and see that this guy's a gamer, that he's been a backup before. He's got again, not a great arm, but he's got a capable arm. He's a good athlete. And look, I think one thing we're learning about the quarterback position in this day and age, it doesn't matter how big or small you are, whether you're Brock Purdy size, whether you're Trey Lance size, whether you're Patrick Mahomes size. Like, reality is you're just going to get dinged up at certain points. And so, Bennett's escapability, his ability to move around, I think is going to necessarily help him over someone, say, like a Tanner McKee, who from Stanford, who, has the prototypical size, but is not the same level of athlete and the guy that can move around in the pocket. I think there could be a potential pathway there going forward. Let's see. Thoughts, comments, questions. Yeah, G Bama boy. Tyler Huntley started a playoff game this year. Skylar Thompson started a playoff game. I mean, Brock Purdy started the NFC Championship game. Like, this idea that you need to look and be a certain way to be an NFL starting quarterback, that could not be farther from the truth. Sure, Mahomes, Burrow, all that stuff. But, Jalen Hurts transferred from Alabama because he couldn't beat out Tua, and now he's going to be starting in a Super Bowl next week. Who you are at one point in time in your life is not who you're always going to be. And Jalen Hurts is probably going to finish second in the MVP voting this year. And while I didn't think he was necessarily great in that NFC Championship game, I think he's undoubtedly a better quarterback than Tua is at this point in time. And I don't know how many people would have said that coming out of the 2020 NFL draft when Tua went 5th and Jalen Hurts was a second rounder. And there were people even then that were saying, why is Jalen Hurts taken in the second round? Well, I think you've seen that with what he's been able to do in his NFL career so far, getting the Eagles to the playoffs in back-to-back years, and this year getting the Eagles to the Super Bowl. Tim Chevelle, yes, off the top of our show, Alabama has hired Kevin Steele to be their next defensive coordinator. A veteran defensive coordinator is been the DC at Clemson, LSU, Auburn, most recently at Miami. Maybe not necessarily the first choice for a lot of Alabama fans. I know there were a lot of people that hoped that he would get that Nick Saban would hire Glenn Schumann. Some would hope that Jeremy Pruitt would come back. If I had to bet, and again, no inside information here, I think that because of some of the NCAA investigations into Pruitt from his time at Tennessee, that made it maybe a little bit tougher to hire him as the defensive coordinator at this point in time. And for Schumann, it doesn't sound like he was ever all that seriously interested in considering the Alabama job. And I think mostly that speaks to where this Georgia program is right now, where you can go win a national championship every single year. If you have a few breaks go your way, as we've seen for Georgia in the past 2 seasons. They have to replace a ton of guys off the 2021 team, and they come right back, go 15-0, and win a second straight national championship in dominating fashion in the national championship game. Let's see. Thoughts, comments. Yeah, and again, like if you want to make the size comparison for why Stetson can't go play, like Stetson's taller than Bryce Young. Kyler Murray was an NFL starter this year who just got $189 million guaranteed dollars last year. Russell Wilson is under 6 foot. Now, obviously, Russell Wilson's a little bit bulkier than Stetson is, but I think that's something there as well to watch. Crow King. I don't think Jalen Carter will be the first pick in the draft. I think the Bears will be smart enough to trade out of there, have some team come up and get a quarterback, whether it be Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. But I do think that, let's say the Bears trade down to 4, I could very much see Jalen Carter being there. I think the floor for Carter is Seattle at 5. I think that the Seahawks, even though it sounds like they're going to re-sign Geno Smith, maybe there'd be a team that want to trade up to get a quarterback there at 5. I don't think Jalen Carter goes lower than 5. And again, if for some reason the Bears don't end up trading out, I could very well see him being the number 1 pick in the draft. I don't necessarily know if there is a better player out there than Jalen Carter. I know Will Anderson is a really talented guy, but I could definitely see Jalen Carter. The floor for me, barring an injury that he suffers between now and the draft, the floor for me for Jalen Carter is 5 to Seattle. Let's see. Nick Cole, old friend. Where would I rank Kevin Steele in the Tennessee head coaches? He was briefly the interim head coach after Jeremy Pruitt had been fired and before Josh Heupel had been hired. I mean, I'll say this: I think I'd take Kevin Steele over Jeremy Pruitt based on the way things ended there. Probably over Butch Jones as well, and maybe even Derek Dooley, given the way some of the things there. Although, in fairness to Butch Jones, he did have them go top 25 in back-to-back seasons, 9-win years. But yes, for a very brief time, he was the Tennessee head coach. It speaks to just how quickly some things can change in college football, where Tennessee was an absolute dumpster fire in the offseason of 2021. Pruitt gets fired. Heupel comes in late in that relative coaching cycle hire. And 2 years into his tenure, they've won an Orange Bowl. And look, they lost to Georgia this year and they got embarrassed against South Carolina. But look, even I think the most biased Georgia fan or an Alabama fan could acknowledge that the Tennessee program is in a much healthier spot than it ever really was under Jeremy Pruitt. And quite frankly, it has been at any point in time, certainly in my lifetime, or at least my adult sentient lifetime since, I probably really started diving in and following college football, not since the days that Fulmer was the head coach at Tennessee, has the Volunteers had this much of upward trajectory. And they got to replace Hendon Hooker, Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman. And I do have some concerns about Josh Heupel's scheme in terms of the more teams see it, maybe the more comfortable they get playing against it and have a better idea of what's coming. I think you've seen that from Georgia. I think Kirby Smart really benefits from the fact that he saw the scheme at Missouri early in his tenure when Heupel was the offensive coordinator there, and the fact that he gets to continue to play against it. I think that's a big reason why you were able to see Georgia go out there and slow down Tennessee this past season the manner that it did. It also just helps that Georgia has better athletes than Tennessee does, and I think that's going to continue to be the case given, we've seen what Heupel is. He's not, in my opinion, going to be able to elevate Tennessee to a place where they're signing top 5 classes every year, but right now they're signing fringe top 10 classes. Maybe you can get that in the 7, 8, 9 range. But I think Georgia, under Kirby Smart, is always going to have a talent advantage over Josh Heupel. And I think with what we've seen so far going against him, I think Kirby has maybe Heupel's scheme figured out a little bit. Obviously, they have to go to Knoxville next year. That's going to be a tough game, probably the toughest on Georgia's regular season schedule. The fact that they're going to have a first-year starting quarterback, whoever that might ultimately be, whether it's Carson Beck, Brock Vandagriff, or Gunnar Stockton, it's going to be a real challenge for them. It'll undoubtedly be the toughest place that they play next season. Obviously at Auburn on September 30th, a game I won't be in attendance for because I have a buddy who is getting married that day. Go ahead and mark your calendars for that. Last time I missed a game for a wedding, it was Georgia versus Tennessee, 1-3. I imagine Georgia versus Auburn will be 1-3 on September 30th. Don't ask me how, but that's just sort of the way these things go. So it'll be interesting there to sort of see how things go this season for Georgia and for Tennessee after the Volunteers won 11 games last season. Let's see. Thoughts, comments, questions. Alan Rabanich, is it September yet? No, I'm okay with, taking a little bit of time here right after the season ends, but I can certainly understand why some feel the way that they do. Again, college football, it is the shortest sport in terms of the season, but it also seems like the longest off season, which I guess that makes sense given the shortness of the season. But, it's something where you probably wish could be like 2 or 3 weeks longer. That's sort of where it is. Let's see. Thoughts, comments, or questions? Tracy Burgess. Plenty of people get married in the fall. My friend Nathan Puckett, freshman roommate, gets married in the fall. It's a wonderful time of year to get married, and your college football allegiances should do nothing to dissuade you from that fact. That is a hill I am going to die on. Let's see. Maybe 1 or 2 more questions here if we're calling it a night. Steve Cook, I won't necessarily go this far in saying that Bama loses 3 regular season games. I mean, they do have Texas next year at Texas A&M, a team that has pushed them, beating them the last time they went down there to College Station. And look, I thought I'd be ahead of the curve in saying that LSU was going to win the West next year. Apparently that is not all that, under the radar of a pick. It actually, I think maybe by the time we get to SEC Media Days, there might be people that have talked themselves into LSU being the team from the SEC West as the representative this year. I won't necessarily go that far at this point in time, but Alabama's got some major questions to answer. They've got 2 new coordinators coming in. They've got a new quarterback to replace. Is it going to be Jalen Milroe? Is it going to be Ty Simpson? They lose a lot on the defensive side of the ball. I know there's been some early reporting on production returning production numbers for next year. Alabama loses a ton on that side of the football. And so it is going to be worth watching to sort of see what we see from that Alabama team next year. It makes sense. We began the show talking about Alabama's new defensive coordinator, Kevin Steele, when I'd ended here talking about Alabama. But to see Alabama go 9-3 in the regular season, look, I know they played 5 one-score games this past season, and they went 3-2 of those, but I think you're going to see Alabama take a step forward here this year. They signed the number 1 recruiting class with a lot of guys that Georgia would have liked to have had, chiefly Caleb Downs and Justice Haynes in there. And look, as long as Nick Saban is still there, they're going to be favored every time they step on the field next year. And so I think, A&M could be interesting. Texas, they do get Texas at home. I think they also get LSU at home as well. So the schedule sets up a little nicer for them this year than it necessarily did last year. They get Tennessee at home this time as well. So I think that's going to help them. I'm sure they get one of the cream puffs out of the SEC East because they're not playing Georgia and they already play Tennessee. So it'll be interesting to see how things go there. I think one thing you have to see from Alabama this year, you have to see that wide receiver room get back to where it was when they had a healthy Jamison Williams and a healthy John Mechie, because without them, that room is not the same. And quite frankly, that offense is not the same. And I think the lack of production at wide receiver is maybe the biggest reason that this Alabama offense underachieved the way that it did this past season. Bryce Young, I thought, was fantastic once again. I think Jahmyr Gibbs was a real impact player, but the fact that the wide receiver room didn't take a step forward this past season might be the biggest reason why I think so many people were happy to see Bill O'Brien gone. Bill O'Brien's an incredibly successful offensive coordinator. Was a great head coach for the Houston Texans. I know once he got involved in the player personnel side, things didn't necessarily go as well for O'Brien there. But there's a reason he was an in-demand offensive coordinator after this season. And so I think how Alabama goes about developing its wide receivers this year, I think, along with replacing guys on defense, but Kevin Steele is your defensive coordinator. Nick Saban is still helping out on that side of the ball. I think they're going to be just fine on defense. And so it's really, the ceiling of this Alabama team, I think, because of the way this offense has been in recent years, it'll be interesting to see what it looks like under Tom and Reese, but so much of it was dependent on, can your wide receivers be elite? And they just weren't last season. So we'll end it there in terms of where things are going. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm sure if and when Todd Monken does get hired, or Tampa Bay or Baltimore, all the NFL offensive coordinator roles get answered, we'll be on here to talk once again. You've got Mike Griffith on the beat tomorrow night with a lot of news and notes and intel coming out of the Senior Bowl. Brandon Adams every Monday through Friday. Jeff Sentell will be back to recap the latest with Deuce Robinson. He was out in Arizona last week getting some great intel on both Deuce Robinson and Dylan Raiola, the number one overall prospect for the 2024 recruiting cycle there as well. Make sure to stay tuned in to DawgNation for any news notes you have. Hit like and subscribe on both this video, and make sure you're subscribed to the DawgNation YouTube page. We're going to have a ton of stuff coming out throughout this week because, while yes, it is technically the offseason, content and interest in Georgia football never stops, and that's thanks to great fans like you guys for tuning in and watching. So thanks so much for tuning in. We're going to have more content coming for you. Big news of the night: Kevin Steele is the new Alabama defensive coordinator. That very clearly means that Glenn Schumann is going to be sticking around for another season at the University of Georgia. My name is Connor Riley. This has been DawgNation. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys.